Hello, I'm Jeff Judge, and welcome to the More Than Spanish podcast, where it is my job to interview people from abroad who have come to live in the Cádiz region. We will learn from their stories, tricks, and tips to adjusting to the culture, language, and life here in southern Spain. In this episode, I interview Norina, who has lived in Spain for 8 years. Well, thank you for joining us this morning. And so if you could go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Norina, and I'm married. I have 2 daughters, one 17 and one 11, a senior and a 6th grader. We live in Roda. We've been here, this is our 8th year that we're here, and we live in Roda, like I said, and we're loving it thus far.
Wow, 8 years, okay.
Yes.
And where did you come from before coming to Spain?
Prior to Roda, we came from Naples, Italy. We were there 4 years. And prior to Naples, we were in California while my husband was in Bahrain during the 9/11 situation.
And so think back when you first arrived to Rota. What was the first thing that shocked you? Maybe it was the same day or after a week that shocked you about the culture here in southern Spain. What do you remember as one of the first strange moments of this is different?
Well, maybe for me it might have been different than anybody else's take, perhaps because we came from Naples and it was totally like day and night kind of difference. So the very first week, what struck me in Little Rhoda where we live was the quietness of it and the cleanliness of it and the structure of it and the stopping so people can cross the street. I was baffled by that because I couldn't have enough of gasping, wow, that's the way it was going my first week. It was so quiet coming from a louder place that I told my husband, I recall I told him this, I said to him, if I stand still long enough, I'll fall asleep because that's how quiet it was compared to where we had come from.
Yeah.
But you asked me that question today, and I'll ask you how wonderful and so appreciative I am of that, because it's not as quiet anymore because it's built up a little bit more. However, the notion that you come from loudness to a little bit softer, day-to-day living noises, I learned to get accustomed to that and appreciate that and living in there. So if you take me back to where we first came back then, I'll tell you this is absolutely wonderful. I appreciate it. Yeah, love it.
What time of the year did you come? Because I imagine August is a little bit different than if you came in March.
Absolutely. We came at the end of October. Okay. It was nice in fall, and it was, a few cars going back and forth, where we live anyways. I don't know for others, but it was a very nice autumn kind of week, and it was just sweet and soft. That's the best way I can describe it.
Did you have much help about where to look for housing and all of that, or how to get set up? Did you have much help before you arrived, or what helped you the most as you transitioned?
Yes, we had a sponsor, but the sponsor was gone at the time we arrived here. So we looked in Costa Ballena, in Rota, in Chipiona, in Puerto, and even Jerez for a minute. We looked, we gave it our good push, but we ended up settling in Rota because my husband had fallen in love with a house in Rota, and we came, we looked at it, we went around, looked at others, and then we came back to the same house. But we have a friend, a Spanish friend that we met in Italy, and she opened her doors and her arms and their hearts of the family, and they welcomed us in, and it helped kind of like give us that boost because a lot of questions we had asked them.
Okay. And how was your level of Spanish before you arrived?
My level of Spanish was decent. I didn't speak like, the way that the Spanish from Spain speak. I consider it more like a Latino, a little bit broken, it's a different kind of Spanish. However, we could understand each other, but a lot of times what I would ask the question in my Spanish to make sure that I understood what they were telling me or what I understood. So like for instance, when I went to sign up my little one in school, at the paper that they gave to me were a lot of big words, and I didn't understand what it said, I would imagine, and then I would ask, does this mean registration? Does this mean, and I would ask them in my own way what it meant, and then they would break it down and explain it to me again.
Yeah, that's true. I think that the Castellano has longer words or
very formal.
Very formal, right?
Yes.
That's true. More a legalese
Yeah,
type of
yeah.
way, especially with any kind of official documentation.
Yeah, absolutely. The documentation kind of takes me to a whole nother level, because half the time I'm like, okay, what does this word mean?
Yeah. And were you able to quickly get up to speed on the Spanish here to be able to, figure out all these differences?
Well, the forms that the way and the podais, and all of the forms of nosotros, vosotros, all of that stuff. When I speak, I still don't use those forms.
Oh, you don't?
I still use my own, even though my friends, all of them speak like that. But I understand it now, so that's the difference. But I still speak my own way of, ustedes vienen aquí, or
Okay.
vamos, or
Right,
like
more of
that
the
kind of
formal.
stuff. Sí,
Okay,
sí.
well, that they would consider formal here.
Yeah.
They quickly go to the vosotros.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what about your family and their level of Spanish? How was it when they arrived compared to what it is now?
Well, my husband speaks very little, and the reason is because he has all Spanish around him, the majority is Spanish around him, and they speak English to him.
Okay.
So they make it easy for him. Sorry for my little one. Then I put her in a Spanish school, and because that's all she heard all day long, every day. Within a few months, she was like going to town with her Spanish. She was very fluent. My other daughter, we were a little bit afraid that she couldn't pick it up as fast. She was 5th grade coming here, so we had put her in the American school on base. However, she's taking Spanish, and she's been taking Spanish, and as a matter of fact, she's this year she's participated in as one of the damas of Rhoda, and one of the requirements, I believe, she had to speak Spanish. So 19 young ladies that are Spanish, and she's the only American. So she communicates with them, she's befriended them, and her Spanish is decent, where you can converse and be friends with a non-English speaking person. So I think it's great. They've come up during the years. Yeah.
Okay, so your daughters were 5th grade, and how old was the youngest when you arrived?
When I arrived, she was 3.
3, okay, so that made a big difference.
Big difference, yes.
And why did you decide to put the youngest in a Spanish school compared to, an English speaking?
Yes, well, while I'm not, I wasn't born and raised in the States, so I was born and raised in Curacao and the islands. So our ways also are similar to here, where we go to one class and one teacher and however many students. Typically here where my daughter went to school, it was 25 students in one classroom, and I found it there was nothing wrong with that. And hey, we're here in Spain. Spanish culture led her. I wanted both of them to go, but like I said before, my husband was a little bit not sure if my other daughter would catch on being 5th grade with the classes and the lessons and so forth. But for a 3-year-old going for, how much more could you start from the very beginning going like that? So if I had my way, both of them would have stayed in the Spanish schools. But we allowed my little one to start there, and within 2 years, on 1st grade, we put her into the American school.
And what was your experience working with the Spanish school for those 2 years? How would you describe it from the parent point of view?
From the parent's point of view, I was friends with a lot of other parents. It's a totally different take, because we couldn't just come up at the school when you wanted to visit, when you wanted to, and after school you have to wait till the kids come out so you can receive them. Versus the differences on at the American school, you can volunteer, you can come, you can participate, you can be in the classroom. So the difference are culture-wise, like a big change. However, I found it's a lot of passion from the moms. Even when the holidays came, or even when they were able to participate, they were all involved. They were all participating. They were all helping out. And there's one mother of the class, and they were making sure things got done, and they would invite you for coffee after. Just really nice camaraderie between parents, and from a teacher standpoint too, the teachers appreciated us coming in as a non-Spanish family, non-Spanish speaking, student.
So you're saying, if I understand, the main difference you saw between kind of the American schooling system and the Spanish schooling system, well, one of the differences is that in the American system, as a parent, you have more access to the teacher, to the classroom. There's more involvement, or maybe an involvement is not the right.
Well, perhaps somebody can interpret it like that, but to me, the differences were a lot. For instance, in the States or even here, you can go to the school anytime, you can volunteer at any time, you can, if you want to sit inside of the classroom and monitor, you're welcome to do that, and in several occasions we've done that. But over here, you're not allowed, as far as I know, even till now, you're not allowed to come up and sit in the classroom and participate, unless there is something major that you specific requesting, exception to the rule, but you weren't, it was the teacher's class. Once you dropped off your children, these kids belonged to her,
okay,
and so forth.
So the teacher was the master of her domain.
The teacher was the master,
okay.
And there was no going around. Now our kids, they go from teacher to teacher, different classes, and that teacher taught every single class, whether it's math or reading or Spanish, whatever it was. That teacher had your child the whole day. Even recess, they would go in front of recess and come right back into that teacher. Exercise, every single thing.
So what advice would you give parents who, I'm also a parent of an 8-year-old, who we can be a little neurotic at times with, wanting to control as much as possible our children's education. If you're coming from a system, well, in this case, like in the United States, where you have much more access to a system where the initial feel can be that you are pushed away, what advice would you give parents who do put their children into the Spanish system to kind of calm them down? Or what would you say to someone who has a 3 or 5-year-old?
Yeah, well, I would ask him to speak to other parents that have had their kids in the Spanish schools. For me, the experience has been wonderful. For me, myself personally, my child has grown a lot from that. As a matter of fact, she was stronger when she came out, because there is a little bit of toughness that you have to bring to when your mom leaves you and you see your mom at the end of the day. To some parents, it may be a no-go, but for me, like I said, growing up in the islands, it was similar, very close to the culture of here, where your mom dropped you off and your mom picked you up at the end of the day, 9 out of 10 days, So for me, if you spoke to other parents and see what was your outcome, how did you like it, or because it may not always pan out like that, but maybe you have a teacher that's a little bit tougher or a teacher that's a little bit more lenient, it's not always even. However, my experience has been great. Even now, when I speak to other parents, they love that their children are in Spanish schools, and they wouldn't change it. I wouldn't have changed mine. Like I said, my husband, the only reason we switched my daughter back to the American school was because my husband wanted the 2 girls to be together, and that was the only reason. Other than that, I wished I would have and could have left her in that Spanish school. I think you benefit so much from it, not just from the Spanish, but your child comes out much richer for it. Your child comes up where we don't have all the stuff at our hands. You have minimal of stuff on the playgrounds. Even you learn to play with one another. Even from that standpoint, you bring out some kind of sentiment of inner being that you cannot have in a toy. There's nothing wrong with having a toy, because when you go home, you'll have your toy. But you start to connect from earlier age at a deeper level. With your fellow friends, So for me, it's much more than just an all-day event. For me, it touches all the stuff. If you really wanted to look beyond or underneath the surface, it does a good service for our children.
So, how did you choose the school, the Spanish school? 8 years ago, I'm assuming it's a similar system as now. Do you remember the process of selecting the school?
Yes, I'm not sure if it is this exactly the same because my daughter's been out now 6 years. However, we live right by one school, and this school was private school. We wanted our daughter to go to that one. They wore uniforms, and it would have been much easier for me. And it's between my house a door to the school door is 2 minutes, so we would have walked there. But the school was full. It was full, and you had a waiting list. So we couldn't wait, so we had to sign up, and the very next one available within, I guess, the jurisdiction of our home. I guess they go also by points, like how far you live and so forth. So we ended up going to Luis Ponce. So it's right outside of the gate of the base, and there are 3 other schools right around there as well. There's quite a few other schools around there, but we ended up at Luis Ponce de Leon.
Okay.
So it was good. The teacher was wonderful. I mean, like I said, the system is designed so you go closer to your home, but they're filled.
Yeah, that's true. I see a lot of questions from people arriving here about getting their children into schools. And it seems like, well, what we had to do also was prioritize what would be our first preference, second preference. I think we had to write down 4 schools. And a lot of parents, if they arrive, they simply don't even know what schools to put or in what order. How did you decide that next school that you actually got by proximity, or how did you decide what schools to put in your list?
Well, the intercultural service, ICR, there's a lady there, Rosa is her name, and she kind of guided us because we didn't know, and she kind of guided us, okay, this is where you live, these are the schools around you, because we had no clue, and then she pointed those out to us.
Okay, that makes sense. Is there anything else, any other advice for parents about schooling that you would say before we change topics and talk more about language?
Yeah, I would say even when you don't speak Spanish, or if you don't speak Spanish, take a Spanish person with you if you could, or ask a friend if they know of somebody, because I know somebody that knows somebody that speaks Spanish that can help you. You can ask them if they'd like to go with you, and then you can observe yourself. And they do make those exceptions where you can come and you can kind of like, look at the facility, look at the classroom, and look at the students in between before you make that decision outright. So there's a lot of help, there's a lot of guidance if you really are interested. I think it's all a matter of speaking and asking, and then go from that point. But there's a lot of answers that you can get, and I think if you do your homework, you won't be disappointed.
So you were able to visit the school, you're saying, before?
See, yes,
Oh,
I was
okay.
able to visit the school and see. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you, I wasn't sure about the school at the beginning. When I visited, I was like, oh, but...
What, I mean, I hate to use the word red flag, but what things did you see that made you hesitate?
Well, for me, the school was way minimal. Minimal meaning it was just maybe not even 4 walls, 2 walls, and then a playground, and then for the little ones, it was like a plaza, or like a little open field, you can say.
Patio, yeah.
Yeah, patio. There was nothing, and I'm thinking like, okay, my child is gonna die here, but. And I was wrong, of course, because there was no other options, because the other schools were full, so they sent us there. So after I checked, I said, okay, let's give it a try. And I'm glad I did, because I had no regrets at all.
Yeah, and we had a similar experience too when we first saw where the kids at my son's school play, like recess. It's just a concrete slab of, it is like, wow,
Yes.
He's used to these playgrounds with swings and all these jungle gyms and everything, and so it was a little bit shocking at first.
Yeah, a little bit shocking.
But the kids, they have fun.
Yes. The only one thing I would point out too is, like, we typically, outside of Spanish schools, we are more protective of our kids, and we shelter our kids a little bit more, perhaps. Like I said, that's not for everybody, but maybe for some of us. But in the Spanish school, the kids are a little bit more rougher. So your child just learns by no choice to become tough, during their course of staying or going to school there.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Well, switching gears to talk about language, obviously you had a big advantage knowing Spanish already. But I imagine you have friends who have come without any
Yes.
language, previous language experience. What kind of advice would you give about language acquisition? Is it important to know Spanish? What should people do who only took, here's a typical comment, oh, I took high school Spanish, or I took a year in college. What would you suggest people who come without knowing Spanish?
I think, again, that's just me. I think it doesn't, you don't have to learn Spanish to live here, and it doesn't give you an edge. However, if you have a little bit from high school or from college, just bring back your book and kind of like freshen up a little bit for the basics of it, for the basics of going to the gypsy market, for the basics of going to the supermarket. How much is this, good morning, and thank you, and please, and excuse me, and just the basic, and then you can build upon that. But for the legal aspect of it, somebody has to come out to the house and fix something. Now that one, I would say, if you don't know the Spanish, ask your landlord or ask a friend, or kind of like do your translation, Google translation, during the course, because those are a little bit more. He might be charging you $100 an hour or something, and you're thinking like, $100 for however. But so it gets a little bit more difficult if you're going into the legal part of it. But for the basic day-to-day life, for me, I didn't need the Spanish right away. I'm going to tell you my story. In Italy, when we first got to Italy, everybody was speaking like 100 miles an hour Italian, and it was like coming at me in a group of the landlords, and they were showing us houses and friends, and it was just a lot, and I thought I would never learn it ever. I never been exposed to Italian language like so much. The landlord wouldn't even speak to me. He kept speaking to my husband, and my husband only spoke English. And I said, okay, well, I guess I don't have a choice. So what I did was, between the neighbor that would always ask me, "Café, tu vuole café?" She would ask me for café. I kept saying no at the beginning, but soon enough I started to say yes. Between her and some books, some TV shows with subtitles, and the radio, I slowly but surely started to pick it up. Within, I think it was 8 months, and I could carry a conversation in Italian. So at the end of our 4 years there, the landlord was speaking to me in Italian. So it's similar to here. I say, if you don't, find a friend or a connection or a group that would be social, on that social level, where we could just have coffee and have some, and just speak about nothing, just how good the coffee is, how good the molletes are, the sandwiches, and café con leche, how many and how, and so little things that could build up. And then every time you hear it, or in a book, or listen to it on the radio, because a lot of times I would turn my radio, even myself, on just radio channels or stations that are just Spanish, and they're having conversations going on, and you listen and you listen. Some of the words just keep going over your head, but a lot of the time you pick up on a lot of conversation, that what's it about, and what are they, why are they saying this, and what is this word, and I've heard this word before, and you build up upon that. So initially the absolute need to know it for me wasn't there, but down the line, depending on how long you're going to be here, whether it's a year to 3 years or 4, I think it'll be valued if you could pick up on some Spanish.
Mm-hmm. So when you went to Italy, you didn't know any Italian.
I didn't.
But coming here to Spain, you obviously knew Spanish. How was the adjustment or transition different, having known already the language here compared to Italy? Was there a difference in how you landed?
I think it did help, but a lot of times when I mix the words, like Italian and Spanish, the Spanish would like, okay, we don't understand what you're saying. So I had to stop trying to compare the two and just go with the Spanish by itself. But I thought it was helpful.
Okay. And then I guess the question is more for when you went to Italy, because again, here you already knew Spanish. Were there any, besides what you already mentioned, you mentioned TV and radio and just talking to people, any other tricks or insight on how an adult can learn a second language? Anything else that really helped you start to acquire Italian?
Sure. I mentioned before, when you go to, we call it the market, mercadillo, or gypsy market, and you just go, and there are a lot of people there, and you walk. As you walk, everybody will be speaking the Spanish, everybody would be speaking even there the Italian, so you're just in it. It's like my daughter in school, that's all you heard, and even though it's once a week, but that was a lot of help to help me for that day pick up on, a little bit more advanced than the day before. So while you're walking and you're hearing, even when you go to the supermarkets, here I go to, I don't know if you Mercadona and Super Soul and so forth. When you go in, you hear the people are talking, and then you see the names on the fruits or the vegetables. You can pick up there what it is, what it isn't. I still don't know all of the names of the fruits and veggies, but my point is, what I didn't know, I learned. So it was very helpful to be where you didn't have to be speaking particular to anybody, but just on the listening end and being part of the transactions that was going on, cash registry going on and so forth. Somebody screaming something on line one, and I mean, it's very helpful.
So basically becoming an observer and being immersed.
Yeah, immersed, that's right. Just being part of the community.
Okay. Now, switching to talking about the culture, again, you had that advantage of knowing Spanish. But were there any situations when you first arrived, or can you think of any stories where there was just a complete gap because you did not know the culture here that either caused confusion or an awkward situation? Or you mentioned too about if someone comes to your house to fix something, there's cultural expectations in every situation. For example, we've had a couple situations where we expected, well, they said the technician said they were coming tomorrow in the afternoon. Well, it's 7 p.m. and you still haven't gotten a call, and there's that expectation in my mentality that the afternoon is the afternoon. Was there anything that caused frustration or wish you had known about the culture when you arrived?
Yes, I think a little bit like the laid backness of it, perhaps. And also when it was situations with my car, and my husband always goes back, my wife speaks Spanish, so he's quick in a heartbeat to pick up that phone and call me. And when they're talking, I'm like, I'm not sure what you're saying to me. But in those moments, I always, like I said, I always going back to basics. Let's strip this down. Listen, is this what you're saying to me, or is it not what you're not saying to me? And I always repeat that. That's one thing I'm not shying away from even now, where I say, discúlpame, excuse me, I'm going to ask you again, or I'm going to repeat again. Is this what you mean, or is this what I'm understanding, or is this what you're saying? And from a psychological standpoint, it does a lot, because they say yes, and then that kind of clears the situation. Even when you take your car in, half the time my husband thinks because I speak Spanish, if I take it in, they could converse with me. But those are even because of technical terms of car situations. I have no knowledge of none of that stuff. So I have to still tell him, okay, explain to me what is wrong and what section, and point it out and so forth. So we go back to very basic and break it down and just let me see if I get this.
That's a really good point. When you mentioned that, it made me think of, because sometimes the misunderstanding is not only language but culture.
That's right.
And I've learned as a foreigner myself here, even though I've lived in Spain for 15 years, to repeat back what I understand. And I'll say something like, si entiendo bien, lo que estás diciendo es. I'll say, if I understand correctly, what you're saying is, and then I repeat it in my own words, and then that gives them a chance to clarify.
Absolutely. And I think it does something for them as well, because you are trying to understand them. And then the other aspect of that is, as long as you be respectful and your tone of voice never changes, or hopefully it doesn't change when you're, so you can make sure, listen, we're not agreeing here. That's not what I want. So no, look, and even for instance, this weekend I was talking to a lady. I'm having a dinner, and we're doing favors, and she couldn't quite get what I'm trying to explain to her. So I said, "That's not what I want." At the end, we went back and forth. Is this what you understand? No. So going back and repeating and just making sure that this is what I understand. Is this what you're saying? I think it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Mm-hmm.
Now, switching again, how about let's talk briefly about the Cadiz region. Obviously, a lot of foreigners who come here, they want to see around. Do you have a top three, what you have to see, where you have to go while you live here? If you're here for 3 years, what would be a pity if you missed? As in visiting a place?
Well, for sure, since you're right here, where we at, you have to be in Cadiz. Number one, I think they say it's the oldest town, so in the region. So therefore, that's a must. It's beautiful. I think Sevilla is also beautiful. If you just go to one place in Sevilla, Plaza de España, that's enough to impress you. And we've been a few times over. Lovely, lovely. We've been to a few places within 2 hours worth of drive, like Ronda, Gibraltar, which even though it's at the edge of Spain, but even so, those are within 2 hours worth of driving. That we loved as well. Of course, Veje de la Frontera, simple, but still has a lot to offer. We've been to Marbella, we've been to Granada, did I say that already? Cordoba, we've been to that. We've been to Huelva, where you have those ships, Niña Pinta, Santa Maria.
Oh,
yeah. Let me think. Well, for sure, Cadiz, Sevilla, and I say if you could go to Ronda, those places are within reach, day trips and so forth. So
okay.
Nice. Mm-hmm.
And do you have any advice for day-to-day, shopping? Do you have any supermarket advice? You mentioned Mercadona, you mentioned Supersol. Any particular, someone who just arrives and really has no idea where to even, where's the best place to go shopping?
Well, for me, start small. Start with the one closest to you and go there, and then branch out from there. Because you could go to Mercadona, you can go to Supersol, but you can go to, I like those here, just fruterias, which is just for fruit stands, or little casetas where they just have fruits or veggies, and even those, if you're just looking for fresh fruit and vegetables, you can't go wrong going to those places. As far as shopping for clothing, they have in Rota, it's very charming, very, very, very small. They have small places, a limited amount of variety, but still very quaint, and you won't have the same as every other person that's here. So you can go out, and if you want to branch out, you can go to the malls, like Paseo Mall right here, which is within not even 10 minutes drive from the base. And also, if you dare to go further, you can go to up the street another 10 minutes, which is
Jerez?
In Jerez.
The Luz
shopping center, yes. And they've branched out. They have quite a bit of varieties, a little bit for everybody, for my taste. So you can't go wrong there. Also in Sanlúcar, the Sanlúcar Mall also has a nice mall where you can go, spend some time, have some coffee or a little bit of lunch, and then shop for an hour or two, and then you'll be done. So
okay. Mm-hmm. What about any restaurant advice? Any particular places local places that you like, or anything you've learned from just living here? I knew a couple, for example, who when they first arrived, they didn't speak Spanish and they didn't know you had to ask for the bill, and so they were waiting and it never came. I mean, any advice about restaurants or going out to eat?
Well, I'm going to tell you this part may be disappointing to the people that are listening, but my husband likes to keep it a little bit of American in there, with a little bit of variety. So he likes his Chinese food, and we order in, or we go there a few times. He likes some Indian food, so we mix it and quite a few times. But if you want to go to Las Parillas, like meat, because I hear is a lot of meat eating going on, and also a lot of seafood and so forth. For just your typical day-to-day, Los Argentinos in Rota is very Spanish, lots of meat, quality of meat, and a very decent price, not bad at all. 8 or 9 euros and up, you can get a nice full sort meal with your meat, your veggies, and your rice or potatoes and so forth. And you can have your coffee. As a matter of fact, they have your best café con leche in a tall glass, and not your typical small glass, and it tastes almost like a rich hot chocolate, but it's not. It's coffee, and it's by far the best. By Bailey's over here in Puerto. We go there for the bread. I mean, the meal is great. I like their salmon, but the bread that they cook there is, oh, it's a killer. You could just fill up on bread and aceitunas, which is my olives that I grown to like so much. And also, which other one? Like, if you just want to go to the un cafeteria, or the in the morning for your bread, your sandwich, your molletes, like with I've learned to eat it like that here, where I never used to do it before, but with tomatoes and with oil, or with your jamón ibérico and your queso. It's
very good.
And my kids, because they're not so used to the jamón ibérico, they like their jamón york, which is like just a regular ham, and then they like it toasted really enough so the cheese can melt, and when you with each bite it melts in your mouth. So for them is that. For me it's just your regular egg, or with your tomato and your oil, which is good. But for my husband, meat. And for in Rota you have places like Steakhouse that also cater to every taste that you may like. They have a little bit for everybody. Also, another one I'm thinking of is when you're going out of Rota. If you know that one, there's also a meat place. I forgot the name is there. I'll tell you in a minute. But
okay.
Quite a few.
And what about any other practical advice about day-to-day life, about driving, shopping, getting around, paying rent, anything in general that was a transition or more difficult than you expected when you arrived?
Well, definitely a lot of changes when we first arrived. From a practical standpoint, with the food-wise, my friends have taught me you don't have to always go for the full meal. You could just go for tapitas, which is small saucers of little bits of stuff, and that's enough to fill you and keep you. The times of eating also has differed, where you're not eating at our typical American times, but you're eating at Spanish times, which are later, and heavier food like later, your bread in between there, and take time out to rest in the middle of the day, your siestas. While we may not necessarily have siesta, but we have a moment where we now appreciate the siesta, where okay, everybody's on break. As far as rent and other shopping experiences, or even driving, I say the same thing like I said about the Spanish language. Start small, because I've known friends that don't venture off or out, but I guess that's just the island lady in me. I like to go out a little bit further so I can learn the surrounding areas where we have. As a matter of fact, me and my husband at the beginning, we won't go without each other. But while he's at work and the kids are at school, me and a friend, we would go, and then we would put a GPS, and we would put this place in, and then we would go. So we would go a little bit further, and then before you know it, you get used to it, because you learn how to how to drive here. It's not the biggest city like Barcelona or Madrid, so you can still manage even if you were to go 5 or 10 or 15 minutes outside of your regular zone where you live. As far as rent is concerned, that was always an issue, because you have to change the euros to the dollars, but now the euros almost the same rate as the dollar, so it's a little bit easier. Before, we used to go to the bank and withdraw the money and then go, and either the landlord would pick it up or you would go drop it off, but now we do it bank to bank, which is great because they're offering that service now, which saves you a lot of time and effort. The rates, if you can get a better rate by there are some apps that you can look rates, but PSD is available on base, and also they have a commissary customer service where they also change it for you, but it's all at a different increment, either more or less. So it's all up to you how much homework you want to do and how much time you want to spend. But for us, the bank-to-bank was the best deal for us.
Well, you mentioned apps. Let me follow up on that. Are there any apps that you would recommend for people to install on their smartphones, either before or when they arrive? Anything that could be either for language acquisition or communication or anything.
Yeah, there are a few. For the language ones, I don't use them myself, but some of my friends use those, and I can tell you which ones they are once I confirm with them. But I know 2 of my friends are using those for translation purposes and for learning purposes.
Okay.
So I could verify how these.
Yeah, I can add those in the notes later.
Okay.
Okay, good. And do you have any other final advice if somebody's listening to this right now and they know they're going to be here in 6 months or less, or they've just arrived? Any other final advice about anything that you would give to people who are going to move to the Cadiz region?
Yes. For me, and I'm hoping it's not just for me, I'm hoping it's for the great majority, just really try to appreciate where you're at, because this is a good place to be. It has a lot to offer. We're not just talking about languages, we're not just talking about food, we're talking about people in general. A great country, so much variety, such a big country. No matter where you go, you can learn something, you can see something new, or you can experience something that you've never experienced before. For me, coming here was one of the best things that has happened to me and my family, my kids included, because up to yesterday, celebrating my husband's birthday, my daughter stood up and she said, "This is one of the best places we've lived." And coming from a 17-year-old, that's something to acknowledge. Not just the culture, appreciate it, because once you go back, you would realize, okay, I missed that opportunity. So while you're here, I would say welcome it, open your arms, open your mind, and even open your heart for the people, for what they have to offer, for what you have to offer them, for their culture, for the food, for the places to go, and so forth. We're not as much as party people, so I don't know about the night clubs and so forth, but we're more like the Spanish. What they offered us is like they're all about fellowship, they're all about coming together and have a coffee, and it's almost like breaking bread, and it's all about friendship, it's all about people, it's all about show you my appreciation, show you my love for you, and living in the moment, not to how did my friend say it best? She said, we don't because a lot of the Spanish houses, they're different than the American houses. So they say, we're not so worried about that. We're worried because they live outdoors most of the time. Like summer is at the beach. You take in the sun, and so you're outdoors having coffee, and you the majority of the time you use your home to come and sleep and relax and do stuff, but the outside is for the living, so take that in and enjoy it if you can, and take that in and learn from it so you can help another person that's coming in to give them that heads up, as they come. Listen, be watchful, because watch your surroundings, but don't be paranoid about it. Make friends so friends can help you. Touch one another, where you can say, "Hey, heads up, don't go over there," or eat over this place, it's cheaper, or this has the best food, or what, my daughter got Feria dress over here. Feria is coming up, so that's a big thing. So that kind of stuff. So make community out of where you're at.
Well, you said some really deep things here about appreciating where you're at, living in the moment. When you were speaking, what kind of goes through my mind is, well, that's not very American in a lot of ways, in that we're so goal-oriented and future-oriented. Yes. And one of the reasons why our family has come here is to do exactly what you're saying, living in the moment more and appreciating what you have in front of you. How do you do that? I know you mentioned a lot of things, but how would you slow that pace down so that you are sinking into the community? I mean, what would you say at a very practical level for people coming here to be able to do that?
Well, at a practical level, you always go back to where you're coming from. So therefore, goal-oriented, you always go back to that. So we're not missing that. We're just taking a pause in between the lifestyles and say, okay, I'm here now. Let me take this in for right now. It's like you have a dress and you say, okay, I'm picking out this dress, I'm going to wear it right now. So for the time that you're here, don't miss out on the opportunities that are here, because we're so worried about, well, I can't live like that. Well, by the way, there are a lot of houses that most of us live in that we enjoy very much, that we every time we go home, we just they're set up a little bit more where they know that Americans tend to live this kind of way. So there are a lot of houses that are quite can offer quite a bit of the same the same beauty that if you enjoy in the States, versus the little compartmentalized kind of houses that are here. But let's not even look at the houses, let's just look at life in itself. Like you said, how do you do that? When you come here, let's not close up and say, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going there, and so forth. While we have the choice to do so, why don't we open up a little bit and say, let me try that and see how that works, or let me try a little bit of speaking and see how it goes. And if you have bad experience, don't shut all the doors. If you have a bad experience, at least leave a few doors open so you can say, well, it's not like that all the time, it's not like that everywhere, it's not like that with everybody. When it comes to money and gold, we all want money and we all want to enjoy the finer things in life. Spain has a lot of finer things in life that they offer. It's all up to us how we want to live it.
I was going to wrap up, but I had one more question that you brought up just now, well, just previously, was about feria, because I lived 15 years in Barcelona, which is really almost a completely different country. They do not have the celebrations of feria. They have their own celebrations, but not feria. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give about the upcoming feria for foreigners? What would you recommend?
Well, I give you my point of view. When I first came, I wasn't sure what it was, and they told me, well, it's like a fair, like an American fair. But it's like an American fair with their own twist, with their own cultural input into that, because you get so much more than just the fair, where you dress up and where you have, horse shows and carriages and toro, which is bulls, and cows and animals and all sorts of casetas and rides. So you have all in one to me. So when I first came, we came in October, and the very next year during May, Feria en Rota is within 5 minutes walk from my house. So we walked down, and then I could firsthand see what it was all about. Not somebody telling me, I could see. The second year, I decided I'm gonna buy a dress for my daughter and my 2 daughters and myself. So we all dressed up and we all went. They went into the rides. We went and we sat in a caseta and we saw them dancing. The people were just enjoying life for the moment. It goes on a few days, and I think in Rota it was 4 or 5 days, something like that. So the third year, I am all in awe of the dresses and the horses, and how the ladies sit so beautifully, like a picturesque postcard on top of a horse, or going by with a carriage and so forth. So for me, it's such a rich moment where I don't know what to compare it to in the States particularly, but for me the feria is one of the highlights of the year, where it's not just about the music and the food, but it was about one dress that makes you feel beautiful, and one dress that has a lot of ruffles on it, and even the guys were dressed up really nice. So, and I had to take it in every year. I'm yet to get tired of looking at how many dresses, how many styles, it didn't matter what figure you are, you look good in a feria dress. So, and for my kids, they've worn their feria dresses, but they go for the rides. And for my husband and their friends, they just go and they sit in a caseta and they just have a drink or a cup of coffee or something. And it's the social aspect of it, yet again, we're talking about. And my thing is that I take in that they appreciate their culture. So this is one time that they could show off. Of course, I don't want to go to the negatives, because some people tend to go overboard with having a drink or two. But the point is, if you just not overdo it, but just enjoy what they have to offer. I mean, this goes on beyond us, beyond the times that we've been here. I know in Barcelona I've been, and I know they don't celebrate, and a lot of differences between Barcelona and here. But even so, I say this is one thing. It's not a negative, it is a positive, and it enhances the culture.
So are you saying, is it, I don't want to use the word required, but is it a good idea for the traje de flamenco, for the women to wear the dresses?
I would say if you have the opportunity to get a dress, get a dress.
You buy it or make it?
I got my first one, a second-hand one, but it just as good, just as new, just as great. It was reasonable, because I understood that they went from a certain amount all the way to hundreds and hundreds of euros. We weren't ready to dive in like that, but then, so for me and my 2 kids, we went that route. But if you have the opportunity, it's not about feeling beautiful, but it's about being part, like we talked about earlier, being part of the culture where you just kind of embrace. if it doesn't hurt you, it could only help you. So I'm just saying, hey, it makes you feel like you're part of the Spanish culture.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much, Norina,
You're
for
welcome.
sharing all your experiences, and I'm sure it'll be a help for those who are either newly arrived or are coming. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, and I hope it does, ring a tone. And for all the ones coming, whether you know Spanish or not, I would say welcome as well.
This is Jeff Judge again, and thanks for joining the More Than Spanish podcast. Be watching for upcoming podcasts where I will continue interviewing people from abroad who have moved to the Cádiz region. Their stories, tricks, and tips will hopefully help you to settle into the culture, language, and life of southern Spain. More Than Spanish is a local company based in El Puerto de Santa Maria. We help you excel while you are in Spain through our services of troubleshooting, Spanish training, and local expertise workshops. Check us out on our Facebook page at facebook.com/morethanspanish.es. You can also contact me directly by sending me an email to Jeff, that's Jeff, at morethanspanish, that's all together, .es. Jeff at morethanspanish.es.